Welcome. This is a Legacy Games panel. Big surprise to find me here. Going to be a small, intimate crowd. They book everything in this room because it's the room to book things in. This is the less than ideal situation to have what I want to have as a casual conversation. People over here, you're a little far and there's this bright light, so I might do this to try to see you. Feel free to move over if you like, but I know how these things go. You want to sit where you want to sit, it's all perfectly good. Obviously, I've done a number of Legacy games. The first one was Risk Legacy. I've done the majority of them. Charterstone's out, and it might be just about it that I haven't had some sort of say in. I feel like I'm forgetting one. So I'm here just to talk about it. So the thing that I want to ask you is, what would you like out of this conversation? And then I'll talk about it. I might just turn into a giant Q&A right from the beginning. We'll just make it kind of free form. I don't have anything to show. JR Honeycutt, who works with me at Restoration Games and has helped me on Seafall and Betrayal Legacy, where I have a box right here, is maybe going to swing by and jump up on stage just to give a different point of view. But really, I wanted to make this conversation. What do you want out of this? I've done a number of talks about Legacy games over the years. You can find them online. If you've seen them, I don't want to just be repeating myself. If you haven't seen them, I'm happy to ad-lib them. So, did you have something?
Yeah. When you first started Legacy from another talk, you mentioned that you had an idea of Clue.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The original idea, that aha moment where I'm like, oh, this could be something interesting, was during a Clue brainstorm, where I made some sort of joke that I don't know why they keep inviting these people over for dinner. They keep murdering someone, right? Like that there was this implied, like every Sunday a body gets stabbed or thrown down. They're like, well, that's funny. It won't happen again. And it was this sort of moment of like, well, why do games always reset? I'm a big role-playing person. Role-playing games don't reset. You don't start the next role-playing session and be like, well, level 1 character, brand new world. Let's do this all again and see how far we get. You have a sword, and then you don't have a sword, and you have hit points, and you level up, and you die briefly, always, at least in D&D. And so just that idea turned into something, and it was going to be Clue, the usual suspects, and it was going to be like a 10-chapter, what became a Legacy game, where you might get chapter 2, there's a nemesis, and you could, like, kill him like a henchman, and then he would come back mad because he didn't really stay dead, and I pitched it to Hasbro, and they're like, whatever you're saying, we want no part of. And so about 6 or 8 months later, I redid it as a Risk one, and the political environment for pitching it was a little better, and I did a better job pitching it. And then there was a lot of luck and a lot of skill to get it to market, and I really thought it was going to be... I knew I was leaving Hasbro because they were moving my job, and it was time to move anyway. I'm like, I'm just going to light this place on fire and design the dumbest, biggest thing I could ever think of and be like, see you, I'm off to advertising or something. And it didn't work out that way. It turned out to be very popular. Does anyone else... I'm happy to answer your question. I just want to see if anyone else has a topic, a question... Who's seen me give a talk on Legacy games before? None? Okay, great. So I will just feel free to say anecdotes that I've said in different talks and not have you like, oh, here we go with this story again. Who has played a Legacy game? Okay. So you haven't played one? You're just chilling, just want to get off your feet? Oh, you're learning. Okay, so for people over here, Legacy games are games where some of the things you do in one game have persistent state to future games. Some of the actions will carry over. So your game 2 will start in a different place from game 1, partially because as a designer I will tell you it will, like, hey, now in this game do this, like a campaign, but partly because some of the things you did in game 1 will have sort of this permanent effect. And when you get to the end of the campaign, either the game will be done or it'll enter this sort of stable sort of sense where it's no longer changing and you just have a game like every other game. And this allows a number of different things to come out of it. Mm-hmm. Just Seafall for the most part.
But then
Mm-hmm.
as their own thing. And what are like sort of the advantages, disadvantages versus like taking something that's already a complete game, making a legacy game out of it versus creating something full blown?
It's really just like time and energy. Like designing a legacy campaign to go on an existing game takes about as much time, but takes about 1.5 times as long as designing a game from scratch. So if you have to design a game from scratch and make it a legacy game, you're looking at something that takes many, many years. At least it took me many, many years. And someone like Jamie, I think, who is really good at systems and designing these things, could sit down and say, I'm making a game, but here's how it's going to be a legacy game. Maybe didn't take quite as long. But for me, it's interesting to just be given a company comes with a brand like Pandemic and says, we want a legacy version, and it has to sort of satisfy two different things. One, it needs to have a base system that's simple enough that it can be expanded upon, because often legacy games introduce new rules, so you have to have some place to go. If it was, I don't know, Mage Knight, a very complex, rich system or something, okay, do that, but more. That doesn't work, and it has to be a world where it's plausible that you can tell a story in. So I said something like Carcassonne is a wonderful game, and it has relatively straightforward mechanics that, in fact, they have done different things with expansions. I'm not sure there's a story there. There's no characters. It's a lovely city in France, but I'm not sure people are dying to know, what happens next? Why is this farmer lying down? Does his back hurt, right? There's not a compelling story that goes on top of it. So those two things together often lead to something that makes sense as a legacy game. In my background, before I even got into board games, I'm a big role-playing game person. So to me, it's can I build a world? Can I put characters? Can I tell a story with it? Is this weird going back to the 90s is what I thought I would be doing, and then spent 14 years at Hasbro sort of getting a training in board game design. So I'm working in a new space that kind of combines the two of those things together. I mean, things that I've learned that don't work is if any individual game session lasts too long, people get worn out on the campaign very early. You're like, you want to play game 6 out of 15 of this thing that takes 2 hours? You're like, well, that has to be a compelling game. You want people to get done like Netflix. Maybe it's an hour or something, and you kind of feel like, what happens next? And you might even try to do 2 in one night. Or certainly if someone asks you the next week, do you want to play a couple? You're like, yeah, we can do 3 games before we have to go out to dinner. So that is something that helps, I think, starting with a simpler system. Again, I learned some things from Seafall. I'm pretty happy with a lot of what that game did or tried to do, but ultimately the market and the reviews said otherwise. And I agree with many of the things that came out of it. It was too slow to build. I did use the Lord of the Rings as a template. If you watch the Fellowship of the Ring, literally nothing happens for an hour and a half. There's a party, and then they walk, and then they lie down, and they walk some more. And I'm like, let's do this slow, epic build. People are like, no, we don't want slow, epic builds. Or do a James Bond opening, get me hooked. Shorter play session, and the rule systems to that were pretty good. If I just made it a one-off game, I think a lot of them were much closer as a one-off game than a legacy game, because they were definitely too complicated at the start, and so I carved some of them away and made them into the first unlocks, as I like to call them, and then the first game was not interesting enough. It sort of missed, the first 3 or 4 games missed. I think people who I designed it for, who got to game 5 or 6, found a lot of the stuff that I hoped they would find. I was also too keen. I was very excited about game 5, 6, and 7 in the story, and I didn't do my homework of just make game 1 shine where people love it and make it as tight as possible, and then do the legacy. I tried to do them at the same time. It was also my first job away from Hasbro, and I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder after doing Troubles and Sorries and Monopolies and Operations. I'm like, I can make a big game. Look how big I can make this. And, it was a little bit of trying to prove some point that I'm not really sure I needed to prove. But so those are some of the learnings that I came through. Is anyone designing a legacy game or have any? It's okay, thank you. I need to have my thing that I do. Any other questions? Anything you want to know about?
As far as when you're writing a story for a board game, do you have these a subconscious story that you're telling, something like a subsurface layer story that you don't really show to the player, and then have that surface layer on top that you are showing? In Risk, you're trying to tell something that board
A little bit. I mean, every designer wants to feel clever what they're doing, whether it's a mechanism or you have like a certain card that combos with another card, and then you're like, oh, that's really excited. By the time someone plays an 18th time, they'll find this emergent strategy, and they realize people play games twice. So it's fun to put in there, but if it's the only thing that's part of it and it doesn't have something that's more accessible, then you're talking to yourself. So yes, I talk about, like, you know, one of the themes in Seafall is like, as a designer, I was writing a story and I was telling you directions, and oftentimes they conflicted and they're from the same person. So what do you believe, the story or the, and I'm like, it's a little too subtle. But there's certain things that I use when I'm doing the story, like people are more interesting than things. Who's played Pandemic Legacy Season 1? Okay, so I won't really super spoil, but at some point in the middle of the game, you go looking, there's 4 different people we ask you to find. Like, go find this person, go find this person. That's fine. That's all I'm gonna say. They weren't people at the beginning. They were things like find the DNA sequence or find the machine, right? And I think it was Tom Lehman, who's worked with Matt Leacock on some games. He was like, why aren't these people? I wanna go find a person. I don't wanna go find a thing. Then it was this real aha moment, like, oh, you bond with people. And you'll notice in a lot of legacy games, I ask you to name things, and I want you to get involved with your character at the beginning. I want you to be like, what's your name? What's your story? And if you ever do a role-playing game, oftentimes the name is the last thing you do. You sort of make up your whole character. What's my story and what's my power? And, oh, I got 2 daggers and I'm doing this. And then at the end, you're like, oh, what's my name? Talk to me, she. Like, you know, and so you really, that's the final thing that lets you connect with someone. So there's a lot of writer things of how do I get you to care about something which ultimately is meaningless, right? Like, it's a piece of paper, it's a game, you're gonna live there. I need to make you care. I'm gonna have you name it, I'm gonna have you interact with it and put stickers on it. I'm gonna give you a hint or a story. I'm gonna try to get you emotionally involved in something that really has no business being emotionally involved. Like, you're not really worried when you play Agricola, like, I hope they make it through the winter. Come on, live, eat the carrot, right? You're just like, oh, I need to get a carrot, I need to do this, and I'm gonna, right? And so I have to sort of change and do things in a slightly different way to get you more invested in the situation than you were before. And one of the ways of doing that is, you know, provide tropes, provide things that people understand. No one wants to read it. Any text in italics, if you're like most people, you'll read the first couple cards, and by cards you're like, and da blah, da blah, da blah, there's a guy, hey, get 2 gold. Anyway, right? And so if that flavor text is important, it has to be short, and it has to be pithy, and it has to be like 3 sentences so that you care. So you have to say very little. So what you have to say has to be recognizable. If you start doing subtle things about, you know, backstory and emotion or theme, it's just gonna go right over people's head. It has to be like, this guy's mad. Why is he mad? And then you find another card like, oh, here's why he's mad. Someone stole something from him. Because that next card might be 9 months later. And so sometimes I want to write a novel and then I have to remember I'm writing a comic book. And that's okay, because I like comic books. Hello, JR. I'm going to have you come up here in just a minute. This is JR Honeycutt. He's helped me on a number of games. And he is also an authority on legacy games. You did some stuff on Charterstone, didn't you, as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to answer like a question or 2 more, and then he's going to come up and he's going to talk.
Do you have any plans on doing any more original games?
What I'm looking at right now aren't necessarily. I want to move not away from legacy games, but I want to find different places to explore that do that same thing, which is actions have consequences and your effects carry on that may not be strictly as what you think legacy games. One of the things that people have said to me is, look, I really like these, but I never finish them. Can you just give me a 6-pack? Can you give me like a long weekend worth of campaign? I think, you know, I started on this journey and either I led the way or just I was tapping into something that other people were going to do anyway. And you've got Gloomhaven and you've got Seventh Continent, these games which are asking for a very long time commit, and people are doing it. And very soon, if it hasn't started already, people are like, I can't do it. I can't buy another one where I have to commit to 4 people getting together 15 times. So I'm still working on some legacy games, and they will still come over the next couple of years, but I see myself doing more and more of something which is like, here's 3 or 4 games, and then you're done, or it's resettable. Another thing is, as a designer, I only have, like with Betrayal Legacy, it's 13 games. When you go into game 13, I only have the vaguest sense of what your game looks like. It's just too many things can change, which naturally makes me or any designer have to constrain the amount of things that you could change so that you don't get to 13 and you're like, this is broken. Like before we even started playing, this game ended up in a place where it's unplayable, which means that the plot and the choices become more constrained than I'd like, that there's like a through plot and then the little sort of things going around it. And if I really wanted to do something where you could be in different places, you have to limit the number of games, like breadth limits depth of a game. So which dovetails, because it's like now you can play 3 games and at the end, you have a very different game experience than someone who played 3 games and made very different choices. They're not superficial or even intermediate changes. They are significant changes like, yeah, and then we played at the end where we're all a co-op game fighting against the demon lord. And you're like, we were at war with the king and there was no demon. Like, what happened? Like, you can actually go a lot wider with your mechanisms and your changes if you're only going like 3 levels deep as opposed to 14. And it could be the type of thing that you just play in a night. You start at 6 at night, and you're done at midnight or something, and you're like, that was cool. Whether you reset it or buy a new one, like, I don't know. Is that a legacy game, or is that just sort of a different interactive narrative game? So I see myself doing more. If I'm going to be doing something from scratch, it's probably going to be more of that for the next couple of years, just to see if there's something there.
I'd be interested in that too.
All right, one sale. Right. Well, is that history or fiction? I'm not going to touch that for marketing reasons, but I understand what you're saying. Sure. That's what a lot of war games, right, and miniature games have done in the past. Like if you were the general in this battle or you were starting here, how would you make decisions that maybe weren't done in real history, and what does that lead to? I see no particular reason why a historical game wouldn't work, provided that everyone knows that you're very quickly going to become ahistorical. And you're like, well, that's not what happened. The reason I haven't done it is no one's really asked me to do it. There aren't as many historical games. It requires a little bit more research to become enough of an expert at the beginning to know the possible situations that would resolve out of it. I mean, my degree is in history. I always say that history is the best, IP that you can use to like create interesting worlds. And a lot of the stuff that I end up writing, I'm like, oh, this reminds me of like this thing in Rome, or this reminds me of a, Germanic history thing that I know about. So I regularly crib from history and then just repurpose it, because you can't be wrong in a fantasy world. No one's going to be like, well, that's not how that would have happened. Well, no, people will still do that. I've met the internet. So. Sure. I mean, in a little bit, Seafall was trying to do is like it was a game about colonization and the effects of colonization without saying that on the effect. And I mean, that's what it gets into. Is I said, get the most glory to win. By the way, you get glory by doing all this stuff out on these islands, and you regularly interact with the natives and have a lot of choices of whether you want to do it sort of honestly or underhandedly. And then there are consequences being a legacy game in both ways of what you do. And to me, that was an allegory of colonization in history. And a lot of board games are just like, hey, go colonize. Wasn't that fun? And I'm like, for you. And so I was like, I didn't want to like be like too like super like preachy or pedantic about it. I just wanted to be like, hey, like actions have consequences, and sometimes things are a little more complicated. And even though we're told out and like, go get glory, do the ends justify the means? And that goes back to the question of, are there like subtle things going on underneath it? Like that's as a writer, a guide point, like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to explore a topic that's kind of thorny without making a big parade of, I'm going to explore this complicated topic, and simply like, no, just go find islands and explore them. And then it sort of naturally emerges from there. But it was very much meant to be a 15th century going off to the New World, but instead of one continent, it was a series of islands that each had an indigenous, like some sort of indigenous culture. And there's a backstory to them that comes out if you care to dig deeply. But it's like, what does that mean? Like you walk in like, hey, that's great. I built a colony and we're trading and we're doing stuff and give me this and thank you. Okay, we're out of here. And what are the right choices there? And there's no right or wrong choices. And I wasn't trying to say, like, you made the wrong choice. I tried to be like, you made choice A, which results in consequence A, and you made choice B, which resulted in consequence B. And hopefully they feel logical. And I've had some people be like, oh, man, I've been rating all their stuff for 5 games, and now they're mad at me. Now my game's harder to win. That doesn't seem fair. You were nice to them for 5 games, and they're not mad at you. And it's like, and then people are like, we're mad, like, I can't really play anymore where I'm just this aggressive pirate who burns everyone to the ground because they're fighting back. I'm like, well, switch up your politics. That was the thing, is in Seafall, every game was supposed to be like, how do I solve this problem? Well, there's not a lot to explore. I'll become a merchant. Well, there's a lot of unknown area. I'll be an explorer. Like, people are being mad at me. I'll be a raider or a pirate, and sort of fitting your what were they called? Province. They call your province's political stance based on the situation of the world at hand. Like I said, I explored some heady topics, and I think I got a little caught up with my own excitement there, and it could be a little bit more simplified. But it was fun to sort of spend some time trying to, see if you could tell a story using these. All right. Are there any other questions before you ready, Mr. JR? Yeah. What are you doing? You're looking for a pattern back there. There's no pattern.
I found a bunch.
No, okay.
I have riddles for these people.
Okay.
I'll do it after. I don't know what's
It's a little different for each game, but no, very rarely is there a whole story. This one, Betrayal Legacy, actually had a bit more of a giant overview of what was going to happen than most. It sort of came together pretty quickly early on, which is usually the exception. Most of the time there is a beginning and some mechanics, and you do it for a little while, and when you get stuck on one, you go to the other. If you're like, I don't know how to do this system, and you're like, I don't know, well, where's the story supposed to go? And almost entirely with Matt and I, we're just finishing up season 3 from design on Pandemic Legacy. As we have the first act, as we call it, and the ending. And we sort of work towards each other. Like because it's months of the year, like almost always August through October is the last thing we do. Like we know November, December. We haven't necessarily even designed it, but we sort of know it. And then at some point when we get through about July, we'll design it. And we're like, oh, we need these mechanics. Well, we don't want to introduce them in November. That's too late. So let's introduce them in August so you're used to them by the time we get there. And then we sort of knit them together. And then once it's playable, which it is about now. Oh, there we go. Here's another person who can help. Hello, Isaac, designer of Gloomhaven. The whole band's getting together here. And there's Daryl Andrews out there who helped on Ultimate Werewolf Legacy coming out end of July. No, end of August. Sorry. So it goes back and forth between story, and then once the whole thing is built, then you play it through, and then you see what the story really wants to be. Does it make sense? And then almost inevitably at that point, I go back and make the story half as complicated as I meant it to be, which is just about what I'm about to do on season 3 of Pandemic Legacy. I just watch people play. Matt and I have a system. You can't do, I've found you can't do quantitative analysis on a legacy game. You can't have 120 groups play it and do a spreadsheet. Because you're missing all of the subtlety. Instead, we have 2 groups at a time play Pandemic Legacy. They record all of their sessions and put them up on unlisted YouTube channels. And then Matt watches one group and I watch another group. And I just watched 11 months. I still have to watch December. And I have 600 comments. Now, some of those comments are, hey, they like this. Okay, they're just chatting about this part. This seems to be working well. So out of those 600, there's probably 200 that Matt and I will need to look at. That will probably be about 75 things that need to change, of which 5 will be like major, and then the other ones are typos and little things. But one of them is, the story, once again, like I'm living with it, so it all makes sense to me. And then they're reading it in bits and pieces on cards, and they're like, okay, so anyway, what kind of event cards do we want to have in here? And I'm like, no, that was foreshadowing, and you missed it. And so you go back and try to make it like cleaner, and I have like one plot thread too many, so I'll just write it out and fold it into the other plot thread so it's more straightforward. You can stand it up if you like. I did a whole panel on it before. So
was any of these people here for that though?
They were there.
Nice.
Some of those people were there. Yeah, he was there back there.
I just wanted to see the back.
Yeah, well, you read it. Yeah, JR is a developer on this and design and haunt person and stuff. So Well, I have to say the only ones that don't have infinite replayability at the end, for the ones that I've worked on, are the Pandemic Legacy series. I can also tell you it hasn't seemed to have affected sales in any significant way. I was very careful because I knew I was doing something radical with Risk Legacy to make it stabilize and not become obsolete, and that was sort of why it ended. Like, I don't know, after about 15 games, I don't think there's anything left that's exciting to do, so now you can just play Risk on it and you got this world. I thought at the time, and I continue to think, it's like, it was an old movie, Brewster's Millions or something. It's the type of thing like, you've just smoked like 2 boxes of cigars. Do you want another smoke? Like, it was like, I'm trying to think of like the story about like how to teach people a lesson, you know, break a bad habit as you overdo it. I always felt like, okay, you played Risk Legacy, you played 15 games, you're going to your shelf, you probably just want something new because you're like, okay, we did it, it was fun, it doesn't change anymore. But I wanted to make sure that people didn't say like, well, I can't play it, so I'm not buying it, especially as a first game, because that's a first legacy game. It's a very common concern. I always try to make the game playable at the end to just avoid Seafall is playable at the end, this is playable at the end. This is probably has the most replayability at the end of anything. But I've discovered that many games, people are like, oh, I got done playing it. Nothing personal. We played 18 games. We just want to play something. I'm like, no, it's fine. Thank you. I'm glad. Thank you for sticking with the whole thing. And then like they just never go play it. So when with Pandemic Legacy, I remember it was a publisher decision, and we're like, well, we should have something at the end to avoid this PR. And she's like, go make season 2. I'll take care of it. And it really kind of bothered me at first, but I've seen very little substantial fallout from it. Obviously, there's complaints, and people feel that way, and they have every right to feel that way, and it's a legitimate complaint. But most people are like, yeah, okay, you know, we're done with Pandemic Legacy. We're just gonna, you know, take on something simple for a bit and then play, you know, whatever, Gloomhaven for a while. How many games in Gloomhaven if you were gonna play the whole thing?
120. There's like 110, 120 of them at least, right?
All right, so these got a minimum of 30 and a maximum of 50 or 60 maybe if you dug into every corner. Yeah, 80 or 90, right? So, you know, and there's people I know are just doing it like a D&D campaign, right? They're like, oh, no one has to DM, so we get together once a week and instead of playing D&D, play Charterstone. So there's also people that I say, like, I don't want to, like, you know, sometimes people have come up and said things like, I don't want to buy a legacy game. I'm like, 3,999 other games came out last year. That's your call, right? Like, you know, and some people, I don't want to play a trick-taking game. Like, okay, like, well, there's a lot of games. It's a wonderful industry.
Teach you legacy.
Teach you, no. The only thing I'm going to ask people to do at some point is whatever I put up on Twitter, people almost always parrot it back to me with the word legacy at the end, like a bot. I'm making dinner. Dinner legacy?
I mean, technically, yes.
Technically it is. Technically
right?
You eat it once and you're done. But like it just, almost everyone has like 2 people who write that joke back. You're going to see the Avengers legacy? Like, nope.
Technically true.
Yeah. All right, this is JR Honeycutt. I see your question. I just wanted JR to take a minute. JR has worked with me for a few years now. We worked for Legacy Games, worked on Seafall. We worked on Betrayal Legacy.
Unannounced something.
We have some unannounced. We co-designed a Legacy game that will be out hopefully next year sometime. That's not announced. Now works. I spend most of my time on restoration games. Our other company, and JR is our tinker in chief over there. So he was the one who drove Fireball Island around and around and around the country, pretty much subsisting on Dr. Pepper and takeout food for a month. So
That's actually a good point. I got a Dr. Pepper.
He's got a Dr. Pepper right here.
I do.
His Dr. Pepper blood level is getting dangerously low. So you can ask a question to me. You can ask a question to him. He has he's done a lot of development work. I think like you said, you did some. I don't know what you did on Charterstone. Why don't you tell us?
Oh, God, do I remember? It's been a while.
You're at a microphone, so think fast.
I'm easy to find on the internet. Ask Rob questions, and then just find me on Facebook. I'm not busy. On Charterstone, I played the first 4 games of that campaign. Jamie sent it around to 4 different groups. Isaac, you were one of those too, weren't you? Isaac was, and Charles Wright was too, who's a developer for Foxtrot. and played it and gave feedback. Just gave extensive feedback, played through what was there for a day and a half. Honestly, like not a terribly difficult dev credit to get, as dev credits go. Wasn't a ton of work, but it was fun. Charterstone was something very, very cool and very ambitious from the very beginning. We really enjoyed it. The bulk of our feedback from my group, me and Cody Lewis was the other dev from my group, was around the narrative of the game, which Jamie definitely. How many of you played it? Who's finished Charterstone? Yeah, so
no spoilers. I played the prologue. I'm a little busy, so I'm looking forward to that time when I have enough time to play a 10-game system. So.
Yeah, I've only gotten through half of the game so far, and it's farther than I got when I was doing the work. So, but yeah, it's Jamie definitely took the feedback from all the places he got. That dude understands how to use playtesting to make his games better. He's amazing at it, and made a game that's done very well. So, it's Charterstone. I wanted to say, just to follow up on the thing, you said Pandemic Legacy is the only one of the games that isn't replayable when you're done. But something that's notable about Betrayal Legacy is Betrayal Legacy is the only one of these games that you've designed that has content intentionally that you won't play during the campaign.
That's true. Yeah, there are 50 haunts, maybe 51. I can't remember. Well, we'll say 50. And you only see 14 in the campaign mode. So you have seen less than a third of the haunts that are there. So basically it's like you're making your own version of Betrayal at House on the Hill. You sort of play your own backstory, wear it in. You'll end up with a game that is 80% similar to everyone else's game, 70% similar, and then the rest will be different based on what happened during the campaign. But they should all, if we did our job right, be playable in free play. And we actually just call it free play, campaign and free play. And free play is, it's just like Betrayal at House on the Hill. You're like, do I want to play Baldur's Gate? Do I want to play Betrayal? Do I want to play the Legacy one? And you can still see all new. You might visit a haunt you've seen before, or you might, chances are though, you'll see an all new one.
So that was really good. That was a good follow-up. Thanks, man. That was nice. High five. That was good. That's awesome. So Betrayal is my favorite game. The original Betrayal is my favorite game. And it's one of 2 or 3 games with Ticket to Ride and Settlers of Catan that got me into board gaming in 2011. It's the first time that I played like hobby board games. So Betrayal for me is like this real emotional sweet spot. And it's because it does a few things. And I don't want to say, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the things that I loved most about it made it into this. And it's because of this guy. It was really, really good.
So, yeah, earlier in the thing when I was talking about how members of the design team all thought the game played differently, JR would be like, no, this is how the game works. I'm like, no, that's how we'd take out the rule book, and sometimes the rules would be clear, and sometimes like, huh. And I'd be like, well, I know it was in the rules when I worked on it before it got published, and I guess it got dropped out of the rules. So a lot of times I'm playing a version that I worked on, not the final version. But we will leave that. I just want to talk about, are there any other legacy question? You had a question.
Yeah, well, we were talking about like Pandemic Legacy when you're done. Do you find that many people want it to be done at the end? Like for me, when I played Risk Legacy, we got to the end and like we didn't want to play anymore, like you said. And then we played Charterstone. At the end, it was like, yes, it's playable, but like I would almost rather do the reset pack and like do it that way again than play it. And like to me, when we played Pandemic though, there was something just like really satisfying about it being done. Like it was something that we had accomplished together as a group. And like, I mean, I guess my question is, would you ever consider doing a game that's like very intentional and throws itself to the ground at the end? It seems like you're going more in the direction where the board would play at the end.
A lot of times it's the publisher's request. Like the request from Wizards of the Coast is, you have to have 50 haunts. I'm like, well, are we okay with people not seeing some on the way? And they're like, well, no. And they went back, and it was important to them to make it like sort of replayable. And most of the real hard work in this game or any Betrayal game is making the haunts. I mean, you're making a mini game that somehow has to play between 3 and 5 players, that somehow starts between turn 4 and turn 20. And is plausibly balanced. So if we're going to put that much time into doing it, I'd love as many people as possible to get a chance to play them after. I think they're good when they're just done. I think a lot of people are like, I think with some of these games, and I picked 15 as a number because of games before it was done with Risk Legacy, because I just really wanted to, well, one, Risk plays shorter. sorry, let me rephrase that. When I design Risk games, they play shorter. um, and I just didn't want to have that marketing thing of, oh, only X amounts and then it's done, right? So first of all, that's the weird thing is then it's done. And I'm like, yes, then it's like every other game you own, but in that you can play it, but it just doesn't change. But it is a loss. You bought a game for some sort of feature and then that feature's gone. And so it is like effectively over in a way. So there's a lot of psychology that I'm still trying to get my head around. Like if you give someone something and then you take it from them, it's worse than they never got it at all. Even if sometimes like, here, can you hold this for a while? And they're like, oh, this is really cool. And you're like, give it back. Even though they knew they were going to lose, they're like, hey, I held this thing, it was cool, and now it's gone. And so there's some psychology going on there, and about who has the right to say how many times you play a game. Is that the player's right? Like, but I can only play it 15 times. Like, yeah, how many times do you usually play a game? Twice, but I could play it 1,000.
That's right.
And it's not about whether they do or not, it's they want that choice. And I'm like, well, no, that's my choice now. You're playing this 15 times, then you're done. Like, that's not your choice. It's a little like, I'm a big food guy, and you go, the nicer restaurant you go to, the smaller the menu gets, until eventually you sit down, they're like, we're serving you 5 courses tonight, deal with it. Like when you eat at a really nice restaurant, they're like, there's a chef's tasting, and you're like, do you have any allergies? No? Great, sit down.
Oh, no.
And you're like, and then you go to a place that's like a TGI Fridays or one of these chain restaurants that are still have wait service and do dining, and it's like you have 15 pages of choices. So there's this weird psychology between who makes the choice for you. Was it the person controlling the experience, or is it the consumer who gets to choose it? And that's what a lot of this dance around playability and replayability and length of game kind of comes out of.
How deep into the research of psychology in general have you gone into?
Zero. This is it. You're hearing it right now in real time.
On the fly.
It's just reactions. It's me basically putting together thoughts from about 8 or 9 years of hearing things and seeing people's reactions and going, why did they react like that? And then that was the one right there. It's like, oh, I broke a covenant of who gets to decide, like this decision, which is very unspoken. No one ever thought about it. It's like, what are the things you as the game consumer get to choose in the game? You're like, I don't know, nothing. They made the game. I don't get to choose anything, whether I buy it. Like, then it's like, how often you play it? Like, well, yeah, of course, but is that a choice? And it wasn't a choice, and now it is a choice. So that's why it took a while to sort of untangle that. But if someone can think of another covenant to break, then I'll have a second career.
That's right.
So,
I would say that one of the things that made us want to replay or maybe find out a copy of the game that we'd like to play again was the fact that at the end of the game you have a scoring system in there to kind of tell how well you did or didn't do. So it kind of made me want to play again to improve your score.
yep.
So I don't know if that's only possible in cooperative type of games or if that's something we implement in other legacy games when you finish it, possibly having me tell how well you did or.
Yeah, I mean, that was kept till the end for Pandemic Legacy because we wanted people playing the story, not the score. They wanted to start to calculate, like, well, what's my score going to be? And we want to just play the game, try to win, and then here's the score that falls out of it. We knew there would be some groups of people who, when they got their score and got like the second quintile down, were like, hey, well, now we know the scoring, we can score it again. And to those people, I say, thank you for playing a game 30 times to improve your score. I mean, that's a tremendous compliment that you would be willing to try that again. But in season 2, we tell you right up front, there's going to be scoring at the end, and we tell you the 2 main criteria that you're going to use in scoring because that secret's gone. And so rather than having people guess what the scoring is, we tell you your main score will be how many times you win. Just win. And we go from there.
Spoilers.
No, it's season 2. It's been out for a while.
I still haven't finished it.
Well, yeah. And so season 3, we change it up again a little bit, actually. So we recognize that with the 3rd season that people might be tired of playing this much Pandemic, even though we changed the base engine. And so you are more often not repeating a month. It's not binary win or lose. If you win, keep going. If you lose, you get a second chance. It's actually more of a 3-part system. Did you ace the test? Okay, good enough, keep going. Or wow, you really struggled with that month. So it's more of a 2/3, 1/3, so that you end up playing more like 14 times rather than 17 times, just as a way to make sure that you don't have to commit as much time to it. It also fits the theme, which I will be talking about next Gen Con. So.
so excited for that.
Sure, they're consumable, right? And that's a shift in, I mean, there's many types of entertainment that's consumable, right? And you don't even think twice about it. You don't read a book. You're like, have you read that before? And you're like, yeah, I'm reading again. It's the same book, right? Like, you're not indignant about the whole thing. And then there's some things that you can only do once, like eat a meal or go to a concert, which is an entertainment or a spectacle. And games live in this wonderful middle place, which is, it's this little experimentation where you can play the game and then reset it and then choose your own adventure, right? And see what happens with different choices and different random combinations and different things. And it lets you explore and gain mastery. So what has happened in this decade, along with legacy games, is there's other games where people are busy. You know, like, let's have an escape room game and you play it one and you're done. Or when you're finished, you're finished. And with so many games coming out, it's not like every game is like that, but it's nice to see like something like a Time Stories, which when I played the first time, I got tremendously, tremendously mad because I'm like, this is exactly the type of game that I should have been. Like, this is me. But mostly I had a fantastic time because I'm like, oh, cool, I can make one without doing the 6 or 10 or 20 months of work to get here. So I enjoy it. I mean, it's a little different when you're done. There's a secondhand market for those, right? You're like, oh, I finished here. You can take it. That's all perfectly good. And then there's escape room games where you
The unlock
can't
games
sell
are
them.
so good for gifts.
What's that?
The unlock games are so good as gifts. Just finish it and give it to your friend.
Yep. So I think what you're seeing is you're just this exploration of the designer has more control if you only play it once, right? There's a number of games that you're like, I love this game, and you teach to a friend, you're like, okay, that card usually doesn't happen at the beginning. It's you know, you just have this awful experience of random combinations, and that's fine. You're making something that's infinitely replayable, and you have a shuffle or a deck of cards, and you don't feel like having an incredibly elaborate setup to get rid of it. You're just going to end up with edge cases, and you can look at it and be like, well, what if you're only going to play this game like 10 times? How can, as a designer, you go through and make sure that some of those things don't happen? Like, well, what about those 5 cards that cause crazy stuff? We'll bring them out halfway. Then it won't be your first game. It might happen, but it'll be your 6th game. You're like, well, that's new. And so there's a lot more control of a designer of making sure the first game is good, and then there's just more control about what happens when.
Yep.
So there's a lot of more experienced design, which is why I like watching video as opposed to just looking at data. I don't think it's critical at all. I mean, in fact, if I had to go back, remember I first designed this to go around Risk, which is is the dudes on a map original Rage Quit game, and it has a lot of macho posturing around it, and so it really fit into the Risk thing. Like, oh yeah, you wanted this power? Like, it's gone, yeah. Right? And it seemed like something that a Risk player would really much enjoy, much more than a Pandemic player. And like I said, this was going to be my swan song from the games industry. Like, see y'all, look how crazy that was, right? Like, just, like not crazy, but you know what I mean? Look how outrageous that was. And so it was like, well, you just rip it up. It's a piece of paper. Rip up paper all day long. I don't need this phone number. Oh, I paid this bill, right? Like, it has no inherent value. Like, it's like, like, that's what I do when I pay my bills. I rip it semi in half, so if I find it on my desk and it's ripped, I know I paid it.
I'm just imagining you like getting someone's phone number, calling them once. Well, I'm done.
Nah, I'm saying it's a scrap paper. Like, oh, here's a pizza menu. Do we need this? No, just recycle it, right? Like, you don't think twice about it. But it's become too much of a thing that people talk about in other games. It's actually not really important. And in fact, starting in Pandemic Season 2, maybe even Season 1, but Season 2 or Season 3, we say, hey, when something tells you to destroy it, you don't need it in this game anymore. Do what you want. Recycle it, tear it up, put it in an envelope. We're not going to ask you for it ever again, because I think it's just become too much of a distraction. Like, isn't that the game where you rip cards up? Like, No, it's a game where you absolutely will not need this card anymore, and therefore you can rip it up. And I have seen a number of people, and a lot of them are the people who are sleevers and don't eat at the table and everything, have this cathartic reaction to ripping cards up. Like they sleeve tokens, right? And stuff like that. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, finally. Like it just was like, yes. And they just get it all out. Just get it all out. Get all the fingerprints and destruction and like, I'm going to put my soda right on the board. And
That's actually a great point. I just want to line up the cards and just like spill a drink on them.
that is a great segue right back at you. When I was playtesting Risk Legacy with some friends, and it was like a brand new concept, and they were like, oh, wow. And then one person spilled their scotch all over the board, and it's called Highland Park Scotch. And they were incredibly apologetic. I'm like, you know what kind of game we're making here? And they like cleaned it up so it could play, and then they drew a line around it on the board, and it was like, this is where the Highland Park Blitz was, and it became like a war map of where the troop movements had been from like, something, and they were just like, yeah, and they just kind of ran with it, and they're like, that's cool, we're not going to use this board in another couple games. So in some ways it can be I tell myself a freeing moment, but realistically, it's interruptive to everything else that I think is more interesting or important, and it's just really kind of an artifact of being part of Risk at the beginning. And also I wanted people to really I wanted these decisions to feel meaningful. I mean, you play a choose your own adventure book and you're like, yeah, I'll get on the spaceship. Oh, that says the end. No, I'm not going to get on the spaceship. And right, and then you do this and you put your finger in the pages so you can we're all going to Command Z our way through a bad decision. We wish we could do it in life, but if it's like, no, you physically put a sticker here and rip this up, and then the next game you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. It's like,
yeah, it's like playing on an Iron Man mode.
Yeah, it's Iron Man mode. It's playing poker for real money.
Right.
If you ever play poker not for real money because some kid wants to play or someone doesn't know, like within 3 hands, someone's like, I'm all in. Like, why? Well, it doesn't matter. We're playing for string, right? Like, there's no consequence. So it's like, I wanted a consequence of, oh, wait, this counts. And it was the only way I could think of doing it. And I still think it's not essential to design, but I still do think it makes a difference, and it gives it a weightiness that it wouldn't if you could go back 3 games. You'd be like, okay, hold on, we didn't do that after all. Reset this.
Interestingly enough, the number of games that don't destroy components in legacy games, I think, is now higher than the ones that do.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it's not an essential part, and it's just causes unnecessary discussion from people. And not like bad. They're just like, well, what do you destroy? I'm like, nothing. Like, I thought you had, that's because that's all they hear. Right. It's a game where you rip up cards.
I mean, it's a good shtick, right?
Yeah. You don't rip up anything in Gloomhaven, right? You put stickers down. Do you rip stuff up? Yes. Sorry.
Oh, sweet.
He knows. He knows as well. Right. Let's see. We got about 10 minutes left. Is there anything else anyone wants to know? So I predict that legacy games will run their course, like everything. I mean, they'll be around. People will still make them. But like, hey, deck builders or collectible card games, they're right at the end of their big heyday or in the middle of it. I will still be doing stuff with permanence and narrative and branching and unlocking because I think it's a fun way. The voyage of discovery is fun. I don't know if they'll look exactly the same. I think they will be shorter in length. It's like I took all the awkwardness of being in a band or in a role-playing group and brought it to board game. Like, well, you can't meet. Okay, well, we can't play. Well, let's play something else. Well, you can't meet next Thursday. Like, I want to minimize the commitment to them.
I don't know, I don't pay enough attention to what everyone games count. I don't know if it's kind of like a game where you get a smaller box that has 3 games in it, and then if there's a sequel, pick up exactly where you left off.
No, it's a great idea. Start working on it.
Yeah, please make that. I want to play that.
Yeah. Get it in chapters, get it in chunks. I mean, you'll see a real drop off after a while, and people are like, every time you do that, people will drop out, and the price point will need to be lower. But we don't want to turn this into like a business 101 about user retention. What I like is the legacy games, besides given me a career and the ability to make a living doing something that I really love, has given a chance to do some very dramatic narrative moments in different places where people just don't. It's hard to surprise people in a game Because the whole point of a game is before you even start, you looked over your cards or you sleeved them and you read your rules, and people are coming over and you want to be able to explain the game and you want to be able to point at the cards and be like, well, this is what this symbol means. So very rarely can you do something where you're like, whoa, what? Where did that come from? And that is, I think, my favorite part, is the ability to do surprise, whether it's a narrative surprise or a mechanical or an object. Or Eric Lang was talking earlier about gimmicks. Like, I love gimmicks. Gimmicks are great. When I think of working on a new legacy game, one of the things I do is go to websites that sell professional magic trick stuff, like fake cups or all these sorts of things, because like those are basically props that create surprises. Very rarely do they end up in the game in any sort of meaningful way. But I'm like, okay, how do you do this where you pour water and it disappears? And it's almost always you buy something that's been made to create the illusion. I'm like, how can I take that sense of surprise or wonderment and bring it into a board game? Can I hide it? I mean, there was all sorts of thoughts at the beginning of this, which, part of me recognizes why they're not in there. It's cost and time, and it would have been force-fitting, but I wanted the game to feel haunted. I wanted this game to be in your closet and start screaming, right? Like, you didn't even know there were batteries. You're like, what? It's like rattling and doing all this stuff. And you open the box and it's like, you freed me. And you're like, what? Like, what was that, right? And I'm like, and it's not hard to do. It's the same thing as like greeting cards with chips and like stuff. But ultimately it was like, oh, okay, the game would be an extra $20 and people would be.
We'd have many deaths in our hands.
Right. Right, and so like I start thinking, I'm like, I want you to be a little like, do you want to play that again? I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm not sleeping well. Like, I think it was talking in the closet. And
I already don't sleep well.
yeah, so, and ultimately that became a gimmick looking for a purpose, and it didn't really match the game. So fairly early on, but I remember some of our lists were just like, the game screams, the game weeps blood, like a secret panel just pops open on the side that you didn't know what was there, and a knuckle bone falls out as like a new type of die, and you're just like, what? Right? And these are all these great moments, and yeah, there was like going to be a severed finger at the very end that, you just like open the last box and it's just like, well, is that a finger? And like, and there would have been some story to tie in. And the thing about games is it's really an industry of pennies. It's not even nickels and dimes. When you look at the markup under standard, for about every dollar you put into a game, it increases the retail by about $7 to $10. So you're like, oh, it's a severed finger. It's 50 cents, in each game. And you're like, okay, well, I just added $5. It went from a $70 game to a $75 game. And how many sales did you lose for something that people don't know are in there? And you start doing like games that vibrate and weep blood and stuff, and you're like, and people are like, oh, it's only like $3. And you're like, okay, that now is $100 retail and a mess to clean up, right? And so you have to sort of pick your battles in games. It's like, well, what's more important, a severed finger or 35 cards that actually drive the game forward? The finger, yeah, I know. I'm still very happy with the ending.
Give him the finger, Rob.
So.
Give him the finger.
Yeah, I was like, I'm literally going to give people the finger for buying this game, was the joke that we were saying for a while. And to bless Wizards of the Coast, they were doing all sorts of research into how many paint operations it makes it look severed, and like the type of plastic to get a rubberized skin texture, and where like, does a bone stick out, or was it like, we had many a weird conversation trying to get that to work at the beginning, but it did not come to pass. So if you like, you can buy a prop Halloween finger and just throw it in the box, and just be like, I don't know, the designer said there'd be a finger in there. We don't know exactly how it would have worked, but
the joke is now you get the rest of the hand.
Yeah.
Just put the idea on Twitter. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. No, there's some hidden things. This actually has fewer. This only has 2 things that you open, like a packet. Most of it is just a giant deck of cards that we ask you to only take some cards in and destroy other cards without seeing them. That slowly changes how your game plays, but it's more a lot of micro changes. I was just saying, most legacy games, at the end of any particular game, you're asked to make certain decisions in preparation for the next game. And in Pandemic, it works because you're all cooperatively saying, okay, how did the game beat us, or what are we struggling with, and what powers do we need? And something like Risk Legacy, I think Charterstone does this too. I need to play past the prologue. You're like, what will help me in the next game? Well, in a game where you have a shifting trader, you can't like, oh, I'm going to help the trader because I was the trader, and then you're never the trader again. And you're like, I don't know why I did it. So Finally we realized that you can't really make these end of the game strategic things, and instead what happens is you make a lot of changes in this game tactically by reacting to not dying. I said this in an earlier sort of presentation on it, which is, okay, I've got a murderous clown chasing me, and then I kill the clown, and you end up with a clown ghost in the basement haunting people. Well, you didn't really choose to have a clown ghost, but now you're living with a clown ghost. You're like, why is this clown ghost keep coming after me? It's like, JR's grandfather killed a clown in the basement. And you're like, well, the clown was going to kill me. Of course I did, right? So you've changed the game, but it's a horror movie, and most of the time, the protagonists in horror movies are reacting for much of the movie. They're not in control of the movie or the book. They are the bad guy, the mysterious bad guy or guys or persons or whatever are in control. And in most horror books, the protagonist regains control in a limited way. And so that became more of the model for this. It was more a series of tactical decisions that lead to changes that you're not even sure, like, why is this card in here? Like, I don't know. There was something about a monkey, and I don't even remember, right? Like, and then you're like, no, now you remember there. You dreamt there was a monkey and it came to life. You're like, right, that was it. That's why the monkey dream card's in there. None of these cards are in there, by the way. I'm making them up, but yeah.
Eric Lang mentioned in the last panel that music influences him when he does game design. You just mentioned magic tricks, which is pretty cool. Is there any other things like that, like outside influences that you bring in?
There's the obvious one of games, right? You play a game, you're like, that's cool. I like that. That's a good auction system. Or I like the way they brought cards in or did this. For me, it's mostly other forms of narrative. Like I'll watch like Westworld and be like, oh, I really like what they were doing with blah, 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 blah. I won't spoil season 1. Or, oh, they really played with the viewer's expectations of what we thought were going on, and then they didn't, and then they changed it. I'm rereading a lot of the old Stan Lee comic books from the 1960s just to see like how the origins of these characters came around and stuff like that. And they're very different. Like a lot of Stan Lee's work was trying to figure out what to do with the characters. And then when he left the series, the next writer came on and could kind of build on that work and started to really change things. I mean, I read the first 120 issues of Daredevil, and like there's no Kingpin, right? Like he just showed there's just a series of very bizarre villains. So it's comic books, it's television, sometimes it's food. Like I like cooking. I mean,
that's an understatement. He's very, very good at cooking.
What else? What inspires you, JR, when you're...
This is the weirdest answer. Relationships for me. Paying attention to how interactions make me feel and how I observe, either by asking directly or observing how things make other people feel. Actually, Eric Lang taught me that years ago. And Rob has taught me how to be meticulous and how to be observant. So it's pretty good. I just talk to a lot of people and listen when they play games and stuff and try to think about how it makes them feel and go from there.
Yeah, games are an experience, and we are in some ways experienced designers. We want you to have a good time. We want you to be scared. We want you to be like... Oftentimes, like when we're stuck on a game or something, I'm like, okay, what do we want to be happening in the player's head? Are they feeling calculated? Are they nervous? Are they waiting to spring a trap? Are they like clever? How mad do we want people to be at each other during this game?
Are any of you game designers? Anybody? Game designers? Isaac, put your hand up. There you go. I keep things when I work with other designers. I try to take from them certain things to make myself better at this. Rob has two things that are great. One is asking when we're stumped, like, what are we what problem are we solving? What is it we're doing?
Yeah, what are we trying to solve here?
Right. Which is brilliant. The other one is it's so funny. I learned it from Betrayal. Is he'll put himself in the mind of the player and say, okay, it's my turn. What do I do? Right? And then like 3 hours of work are obliterated by that question.
Yeah.
It's like, what do I want to do? I don't know. Nothing.
Right. Oh, yeah, we didn't give them good reasons to do anything.
Right.
It's too many times, and we have to wrap it up. I don't know if they need the room, but our time is done, which is design a game, design a prototype, be in love with all the choices, and you're going to do this, and it's going to lead here, and then I get the prototype, and often I play it at my dining room table by myself, and I literally walk around, and the red player is always angry because he's red, and they make rash decisions, and the blue player is always very cautious. And I'll sit down, and I'm like, okay, I don't have any interesting choices. Like, not that the game doesn't do it, but there's nothing in that very first turn when you've heard all the rules that make you like, I'm going to go that way. There's no obvious choices of how to start the game. It's like the game kind of assumes that you're starting in turn 6 and you know what you're doing. And it kills me that I do that more often than I should after 20 years of doing this. So I've gotten better of, I just want to play that first game again. And I want to play the first 3 turns of a game again and again and again until I'm like, okay, there's interesting paths. They all lead to cliffs of imbalance and horrible things, but now I know the paths that we want people to walk down, which is more game design than legacy. That just gets compounded here. All right. Thank you all for showing up.